The assignment. The neon glow of New Orion Station flickered against the backdrop of deep space. From the towering skyscrapers to the holographic billboards advertising everything from cybernetic enhancements to rare off-world delicacies, the station was a haven for traders, mercenaries, and those looking to disappear. Kaido Ren adjusted his stance outside the entrance to the Crystal Lotus Lounge, his back pressed against the reinforced steel of the bulkhead. He kept one hand close to his pulse pistol, though he doubted he'd need it tonight. This was supposed to be a simple job. Guard the alien geisha. Make sure no one interfered before her buyer arrived. And then get paid. Kaido had been in this business long enough to know better than to ask questions. His employer had been clear, the cargo was valuable, and under no circumstances was she to escape. Simple enough. He had seen glimpses of her once before. A Shi'arin, a near-extinct alien race with shimmering silver skin, luminous blue eyes, and delicate, almost ethereal features. They were rare, highly sought after in certain circles. The way they moved, the way they spoke, everything about them was crafted to enthrall. She was called Ashera. Kaido had heard stories about her kind. They were prized for their grace, their training in the art of companionship and diplomacy, and their ability to soothe even the most war-hardened of men. But she wasn't here by choice. Kaido had noticed the subtle tremble in her hands beneath her silk sleeves. The way her delicate wrists bore the faintest marks of restraints. She had been prepared, dressed in a flowing indigo kimono embroidered with celestial patterns, her long silver hair adorned with ornamental pins. Everything about her screamed exotic perfection, a commodity crafted to be sold. He had seen a lot of things in his years as a hired gun. But something about this one didn't sit right with him. Inside the lounge, Ashera sat in perfect stillness. The soft glow of lanterns cast golden light over the marble floor and silk drapery. She had been trained since childhood for this. To be poised. To be graceful. To accept her fate without question. But her heart pounded against her ribs. Her people were nearly wiped out in a war decades ago. The few that survived had been scattered, sold, or taken into the protection of the galaxy's elite. She had spent her entire life under the watchful eyes of masters and handlers. But this was different. Tonight, she was to be sold. To a man named Lord Varos, a warlord known for collecting living art, and discarding them when they no longer pleased him. Her breath shuddered, but she did not let it show. A geisha did not display fear. But her fingers trembled as she held the porcelain teacup, her gaze flickering toward the man stationed outside her door. The human. The guard. She had watched him when he arrived. Unlike the others, he did not leer at her. He did not sneer, nor did he regard her with the cold detachment of a slaver. There was something different about him. And that was the first crack in her carefully maintained composure. Kaido exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he checked the time. Another hour until the buyer arrived. Then this would be over. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't about to get himself killed over something that wasn't his business. But as he glanced through the viewing panel in the door, something in Ashera's eyes made his stomach twist. A silent plea. Not desperation. Not begging. Just a quiet, unspoken hope. Kaido clenched his jaw, forcing himself to ignore it. This wasn't his problem. Then the alarms blared. And in an instant, everything went to hell. A silent plea. The alarms wailed through the corridors of New Orion Station, their shrill tones reverberating off the metal walls. Kaido's instincts kicked in immediately. His pulse pistol was already in his hand before his mind even processed the situation. This wasn't part of the plan. A security breach? An attack? Whatever it was, it didn't bode well for him or his current assignment. His gaze flicked toward the viewing panel, where Ashera sat inside the lounge. She was motionless, the porcelain teacup still poised in her delicate hands, as if untouched by the chaos unraveling outside. But he saw it, the way her fingers clenched slightly, the way her shoulders tensed ever so faintly. She was waiting. Not for her buyer. For something else. Kaito cursed under his breath. Had she arranged this? The corridor lights flickered, and a deep vibration shook the station beneath his feet. Then the gunfire started. Ashera remained still as the chaos erupted outside her chamber. She had one chance. If the mercenaries outside were who she thought they were, then this was the moment she had been waiting for, the sliver of hope she had barely dared to cling to. She glanced at the door again. The human was still there. Watching her. He knows, she realized. He might not understand what was happening, but he wasn't stupid. He was starting to suspect something. Her heartbeat quickened. Would he try to stop her? She wasn't sure. But she had no choice. She placed the teacup down slowly, gracefully, before she did something no trained geisha should ever do. She moved first. Kaito barely had time to react before the door slid open. One moment, Ashera had been inside, silent, poised, untouchable. The next, she was standing beside him, her luminous blue eyes locked onto his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "I need your help," she said softly. Kaito hesitated. Gunfire echoed from further down the corridor, mixed with the shouts of armed men. The station security forces had clearly engaged the intruders, and whoever they weren't subtle about their intentions. This wasn't some random attack. They were coming here. For her. Kaito didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at her. What the hell was he supposed to do? His job was to guard her. Keep her in place. Keep her safe, until she was handed over to the warlord who had purchased her. That was it. That was the job. But as he looked into her eyes, he knew that if he turned her over to Varos, she wouldn't be safe at all. He had known from the beginning that this job didn't sit right. And now? He had a choice to make. Another explosion rocked the station. Ashera flinched, but she did not look away from him. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke again. "I don't want to die here." It was not a plea. It was a simple, undeniable truth. Something inside Kaito cracked. "Damn it," he muttered. Then he grabbed her wrist, pulled her toward him, and ran. The escape begins. Kaito's grip on Ashera's wrist was firm, but not painful as he pulled her down the dimly lit corridor. The alarms blared overhead, casting an eerie red glow against the metal walls of New Orion Station. He could hear the approaching footsteps, the heavy thud of combat boots against steel, the telltale sound of pulse rifles charging up. They were coming. Kaito forced them into a side passage, pressing Ashera against the cold wall, his body shielding her from view as three heavily armed mercenaries stormed past. "Target's location confirmed," one of them muttered into his comm, moving to secure the asset. Ashera stiffened at that word. Asset. That was all she was to them. Kaito barely breathed as the mercs passed. He could have taken them, but 3 against 1 was bad math. Especially with Ashera to protect. When the coast was clear, he exhaled and turned to her. "All right," he said lowly. "You're going to tell me exactly what the hell is going on." Ashera hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain. She had hoped he would help her. She had seen something in him, something human, that made her believe he might be different from the others. But she hadn't expected him to ask questions. There were too many things she couldn't say. If he knew the truth, he might turn her in himself. Her silence stretched too long. Kaito scowled. "Figures," he muttered. "I'm risking my ass for you, and you can't even tell me why." Ashera's hands clenched into the fabric of her robe. "I don't belong to him," she said finally. "I wasn't meant to be sold. I wasn't meant to be anyone's property." Kaito exhaled sharply. "Yeah, well. That warlord who bought you might disagree. She looked up at him then, and for a second, he almost regretted his words. I would rather die than go with him. Her voice was soft, but unshakable. Kaito had seen that kind of resolve before. He'd seen it in soldiers who refused to surrender. In prisoners who knew they wouldn't make it out alive. She meant it. He muttered another curse under his breath. This was not his problem. He could still walk away. Turn her over. Get paid. Forget about her. But something in his gut told him that if he did that, if he let them take her, he'd never be able to live with himself. All right, he sighed. Then let's make sure you don't. They moved quickly, keeping to the lower maintenance levels of the station. Kaito knew this place well enough, he had done work here before. It was a hub for smugglers and bounty hunters, but it also had its blind spots. Right now, they needed to find a way off this station before Varos's men locked it down. They slipped past a group of security officers, their radios buzzing with frantic reports. Multiple hostiles detected near Dock 7, possible extraction attempt. Dock 7. Kaito's mind raced. That was where Varos's transport ship was waiting. Which meant. Ashera, he whispered. They're moving to get you off-world. We don't have much time. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Where are we going? Kaito hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He had only been focused on getting her away from them, but now what? He didn't have a ship of his own. And if they tried to bribe their way onto a public transport, Varos's people would be waiting at every checkpoint. His mind raced through options. Then he thought of one. It was risky. It was stupid. But it was the only chance they had. There's a ship docked on the far end of the station, he said. It's a smuggler vessel. The captain owes me a favor. Ashira's brows lifted slightly. You know smugglers. Kaito shot her a dry look. I'm a mercenary. We tend to run in the same circles. Before she could respond, the station-wide intercom crackled to life. A cold, measured voice filled the air. This is Lord Varos. Ashera froze. The voice was calm, confident, dripping with quiet menace. My patience is running thin. You can run, little Geisha, but you won't get far. This station belongs to me. There is nowhere for you to hide. Kaito's grip on his pulse pistol tightened. Varos was locking the station down. They were running out of time. Nowhere to hide. The station's emergency lockdown initiated with a deep, mechanical hum. The overhead lights flickered, casting the dim corridors in bursts of artificial glow. The sound of metal bulkheads sealing shut echoed through the halls, cutting off escape routes one by one. Kaito swore under his breath. Lord Varos wasn't playing games. He was closing the noose around them. Attention all station personnel, the cold, unhurried voice of Lord Varos boomed over the intercom. A most unfortunate situation has occurred. My property has gone missing. Ashera flinched, but Kaito's hand tightened on her wrist, pulling her closer as they ducked into the shadowed alcove of a maintenance corridor. The announcement continued. I am offering 1 million credits for her safe return. No questions asked. A bounty. Kaito's stomach twisted. The promise of that much money would have every bounty hunter, smuggler, and low-life scum on this station hunting for them within minutes. We need to move, he muttered. Ashera didn't argue. They slipped through the narrow industrial tunnels, past rows of humming power cores and exposed coolant pipes. The air was thick with steam, the flickering emergency lights barely illuminating their path. Kaito led the way, moving quickly but cautiously, his pulse pistol ready. They weren't just running anymore. They were being hunted. Ashira's breath came quickly as they moved deeper into the maintenance tunnels. She could still hear Varos's voice echoing in her head. Property. The word made her skin crawl. Her kind had once been proud diplomats, trained in the ways of art, culture, and negotiation. But ever since the war had shattered their world, the few who remained had been bought and sold like fine jewelry. She had almost accepted her fate. Almost. Until this moment. Until Kaido Ren, a hardened mercenary, had chosen to help her instead of cashing in. It made no sense. Why? Why would a man who owed her nothing put himself in danger for her? She stole a glance at him as he led them forward. His face was hard, focused, calculating every move ahead, but there was something else beneath it, something she hadn't expected to find in a man like him. A quiet defiance. A part of him hated what was happening just as much as she did. And that was why she trusted him. They reached the end of the tunnel, where a large industrial hatch led to the outer docking bays. Kaido scanned the area quickly. The hall beyond was clear, for now. But that wouldn't last. He pulled up a holomap of the station on his wrist communicator, scrolling through the security feeds. The smuggler's dock was still a good distance away, but it was doable if they moved fast. "All right," he murmured. "We make a straight shot to Dock 13. We don't stop. We don't look back." Ashera nodded, gripping the fabric of her robe. Kaido punched in the override code for the security hatch. And the moment the doors slid open, a pulse rifle fired. A plasma bolt sizzled past his head, barely missing him by inches. Kaido shoved Ashera to the side, ducking behind the bulkhead as more gunfire erupted. They had been waiting for them. A group of 3 bounty hunters stood at the end of the hall, weapons trained in their direction. Well, the leader drawled, his helmet reflecting the emergency lights. "That was easier than I thought." Kaido recognized the armor immediately. Velkar Syndicate. Professional, ruthless, and always got the job done. Kaido had worked with them before. Which meant he knew exactly how dangerous they were. The leader gestured toward Ashera. "Give her up, Ren. You don't gotta die for this one." Kaido's pulse pounded in his ears. His mind raced through options. 3 men. 2 rifles. 1 heavy repeater. Close quarters. They had the advantage. If he tried to take them head-on, they'd cut him down before he could get a single shot off. He needed to change the odds. Kaido exhaled slowly, then threw down a small EMP charge. A pulse of energy crackled through the corridor, shorting out the nearest lights and frying their targeting systems. The bounty hunters cursed, staggering as their weapons flickered with static interference. That was all Kaido needed. He moved first. Kaido lunged forward, his blade flashing as he slashed across the first bounty hunter's chest plate, sending him crashing against the wall. The second tried to recover, but Kaido was faster. He grabbed the rifle barrel, yanked it down, and sent a knee into the man's stomach before twisting the weapon out of his hands. The third bounty hunter, a massive brute in reinforced armor, came at him with a shock baton. Kaido barely dodged the first strike, the crackling energy inches from his face. The brute swung again. And Ashera moved. Kaido saw it out of the corner of his eye. A swift, fluid motion, a maneuver that didn't belong to a woman raised in luxury. She stepped forward, pivoted gracefully, and struck the bounty hunter behind the knee, sending him off balance just long enough for Kaido to bring the rifle up and shoot him point blank. The bounty hunter collapsed, unconscious. The entire fight had lasted less than 15 seconds. Kaido turned to Ashera, breathing hard. "You fight," he said, stunned. Ashera was still, her hands trembling slightly, but her expression was unreadable. "I was trained," she said softly. Kaido narrowed his eyes. There was more to her than she let on. He didn't have time to question it. More security alerts blared through the hall. Reinforcements were coming. Kaido grabbed Ashera's hand. "Come on. Dock 13. Now." They ran. The corridors blurred past them, the sounds of approaching enemies echoing in the distance. Kaido's mind raced. They were so close now. Just a little further. They rounded the last corner. And stopped cold. A squad of heavily armed enforcers stood in front of Dock 13, weapons raised. And at the center of them, Lord Varos. His dark robes billowed as he stepped forward, his cruel smile illuminated by the red glow of the emergency lights. "My dear," he murmured, his eyes locked onto Ashera. "Did you truly think you could escape me?" Ashera's breath caught in her throat. Kaido raised his rifle. Varos's men aimed back. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Varos tilted his head slightly, smirking. "Kill the mercenary," he said calmly. "But bring the girl alive." The gunfire erupted instantly. Fire and blood. The corridor erupted in gunfire. Kaido shoved Ashera behind cover, his pulse rifle already firing. Plasma rounds lit up the darkened hall, cutting through the thick tension of the standoff. The first enforcer went down with a smoking hole in his shoulder. The second fired back, forcing Kaido to duck behind a reinforced bulkhead. Outnumbered. Outgunned. Trapped. Not great odds. Kaido's mind raced. He needed to thin their numbers fast, before Varos's men could corner them. He scanned the environment, looking for an advantage. Then he saw it. A high-pressure coolant pipe ran along the ceiling, just above the enforcers. A perfect target. Kaido fired a single precise shot. And the pipe exploded. A thick, freezing mist poured into the corridor, blinding Varos's men as the supercooled vapor sent them staggering back. Kaido seized the opportunity. He lunged forward, slamming his rifle into one enforcer's helmet, sending him crashing to the floor. Another soldier tried to bring his weapon up, but Kaido was faster, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting sharply until the plasma pistol clattered onto the metal floor. He didn't hesitate. One clean strike to the throat, the enforcer gasped and dropped. 3 down. 4 left. But Kaido wasn't fast enough to dodge the next shot. A searing bolt of plasma caught him in the side, the heat burning through his armored vest. He gritted his teeth against the pain, stumbling back as Varos's men closed in. Then, Ashera moved. She had been trained to be passive. To sit still. To be admired. To obey. But that was a lie. A beautiful cage built for a dying species. And she was done playing that role. The mist still swirled in the corridor, but Ashera saw the opening, the way Varos's men hesitated for a fraction of a second, thinking Kaido was down. She used it. With silent precision, she moved behind the closest enforcer, her hands gripping the ornamental hairpin still tucked in her silver hair. In one swift motion, she drove it into the soft flesh beneath his helmet. The man gasped, a brief, choked sound, before he collapsed. Another turned, but Ashera was already gone, moving like liquid shadow. The next enforcer barely had time to react before she struck low, sweeping his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, dazed, before Kaido's pulse rifle sent him into unconsciousness. She turned just in time to see Varos himself watching her. He was not angry. He was amused. Well, he mused, his voice calm even as the battle raged around him. "You've been hiding your talents, my dear." Ashera's chest rose and fell quickly, her pulse hammering in her throat. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I was never yours." Varos chuckled. A charming fantasy. Then he raised his hand, and Ashera felt the invisible force close around her throat. Kaido saw her suddenly freeze, her body lifting slightly off the ground, her hands clawing at her neck. Shit. Varos had biotics. Kaido had heard rumors that certain warlords enhanced themselves with illegal augmentations, using gravity manipulation implants to simulate telekinetic abilities. But seeing it in action was different. Ashera was choking. Her feet hovered inches above the floor, her body writhing as Varos tightened his grip. Kaito didn't think. He reacted. His knife was in his hand in a blink, and he hurled it, straight at Varos's arm. The blade sank deep into flesh. Varos hissed, his concentration snapping. And Ashera dropped. Kaito caught her before she hit the ground, his pulse pounding. She coughed, gasping for breath, and he pulled her close for just a second, feeling her tremble against him. Then he looked up. And saw Varos staring at them both. Blood dripped from his wounded arm, but his smirk never faded. "Oh," he murmured. "This is delightful." Kaito raised his rifle, but Varos simply stepped back. "You're out of time, mercenary." And then the alarms changed. A new warning blared across the station. Docking Bay 13, emergency override activated. Kaito's eyes widened. Someone was launching the smuggler's ship. Their only escape. "Move." Kaito pulled Ashera to her feet, ignoring the burning pain in his side as they sprinted toward the docking bay. Varos did not follow. He simply watched. Waiting. Kaito didn't have time to figure out why. They reached the entrance just as the massive bay doors opened, revealing the sleek, heavily modified black smuggler's ship, the Shadow Wraith, starting up its engines. And at the bottom of the ramp, waiting impatiently, stood Captain Reese Vega, one of the best smugglers Kaito had ever known. He was not happy. "You're late," Reese called over the roar of the engines. "You're leaving without us." Kaito snapped. "I was considering it," Reese shot back. "You didn't exactly say you were bringing half the damn station after you." Ashera grabbed Kaito's arm, her breathing ragged. "Kaito." He turned. And Varos stood in the open doorway of the hangar. Still calm. Still watching. And smiling. "You can run," he called out over the roar of the engines. "But you cannot hide." The smuggler's ship powered up, the docking clamps releasing with a mechanical hiss. Kaito grabbed Ashera's hand. "We're not waiting." They ran up the ramp just as the ship's systems engaged, the doors sealing shut behind them. Reese took the helm, and the Shadow Wraith launched into space, just as Varos's men stormed into the hangar. The last thing Kaito saw as they rocketed away was Varos, standing there, completely unshaken. As if he had already won. Inside the cockpit, the stars blurred as they jumped to FTL speed. Kaito exhaled sharply, turning to Ashera. She was still shaken, but alive. His hand found hers. "We made it," he said. Ashera's luminous blue eyes met his. But she didn't look relieved. "No," she whispered. "He let us go. Nowhere is safe." The Shadow Wraith hurtled through FTL space, the stars outside stretching into endless lines of light. The cockpit was bathed in the dim glow of the navigation screens, casting shadows across Kaito's tense face. Ashera sat beside him, her breathing still uneven, her fingers trembling slightly. She had never been free before. But this didn't feel like freedom. This felt like a trap. Kaito had felt it too. Varos had let them go. That wasn't how men like him worked. He never let anything slip through his fingers. Which meant, "He has a tracker on you," Kaito muttered, his mind already racing. Ashera stiffened. He turned to her, his gaze searching. "Are you wearing anything new? Jewelry, implants, anything that could be transmitting a signal?" She shook her head, but then her hands went to the hairpins still nestled in her silver hair. Her ornamental pins. Kaito grabbed one, yanking it free and examining it under the scanner. His jaw tightened. There it was, a microscopic tracker embedded in the delicate metalwork. Damn it. Varos had known exactly where she was this entire time. He had let them escape because he was never going to lose them. Kaido snapped the hairpin in half, exposing the tiny chip inside. He grabbed his pulse pistol and vaporized it with a quick shot. For a moment, the cockpit was silent. Ashira's fingers curled into her lap, her expression unreadable. "I should have known," she murmured. Kaido exhaled sharply. "You were never supposed to escape him, Ashira." She turned her luminous blue eyes toward him, her voice steady but soft. "I know." Captain Reese Vega, who had been half listening from the pilot's seat, finally turned around, arms crossed. "Well," he drawled, "that's just fantastic." Kaido rubbed a hand down his face. "We need to change course. If Varos had a tracker on her, then every bounty hunter in the Outer Rim will have a new contract by the end of the hour." Reese frowned. "I don't like this, Kaido. You're bringing me into high-stakes trouble." Kaido shot him a dry look. "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot you were a law-abiding citizen." Reese smirked. "Fair point." Still, he tapped at the controls, rerouting their jump coordinates. "I know a place," he admitted. "Deep Space Station, Drake's Hollow. Black Market, neutral territory. No one asks questions there." Kaido glanced at Ashera. "Good enough for you?" She hesitated. For the first time in her life, no one was deciding for her. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never made a choice before." Kaido nodded once. "Then let's start small." He reached out, slowly, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. Reese made an exaggerated mocking sound from the pilot's seat. "Oh, fantastic. Romance. Just what we need." Kaido rolled his eyes. "Shut up and fly the damn ship." Drake's Hollow, 5 hours later. The Shadow Wraith docked at the far edge of Drake's Hollow, a sprawling orbital outpost that floated in the abyss between star systems. The station was old and lawless, a place where criminals, exiles, and outcasts gathered. It was the kind of place where credits could buy anything, including anonymity. The docking bay smelled of fuel, metal, and desperation. Kaido stepped off the ramp first, scanning the crowd. This place wasn't safe, but it was safer than anywhere else right now. Ashera followed, her steps tentative but steady. The moment they entered the main concourse, a shadowy figure stepped into their path. Kaido's hand instinctively went to his weapon. But then he saw the familiar face beneath the hood. A woman with short-cropped silver hair and a cybernetic eye smirked at him. "Still getting yourself into trouble, I see." Kaido narrowed his eyes. Sarah Kane. She was an information broker, one of the best in the sector. If anyone knew how deep Varos's reach went, it was her. Sarah's gaze flicked to Ashera. Then back to Kaido. "Oh," she said, her smirk widening. "Now I understand." Kaido ignored the implication. "We need information. Fast." Sarah motioned toward the back corridors. "Then let's talk." The truth no one wanted to know. The room was small, dimly lit, and smelled like circuit dust and bad decisions. Sarah leaned against a console, arms crossed. "You're both in deeper than you realize." Kaido exhaled. "Just tell us." Sarah tapped a few keys, pulling up a holographic display of Lord Varos's records. The truth unfolded before them in glowing red data streams. Varos hadn't just bought Ashera because she was rare. He had bought her because she was the last of her kind capable of reproducing. Her genetic profile had been modified. She was supposed to be part of a breeding program. A new generation of enslaved Shirin. Ashera went still. Her entire world shattered in an instant. All those years of training. Of being told she was special. Unique. It was all a lie. She wasn't meant to be a companion. She was meant to be a prisoner in a golden cage. Kaido's hands clenched into fists. Varos didn't just want control. He wanted to rebuild an entire species under his rule. Sarah folded her arms. You see the problem now? Kaido's mind raced. This wasn't just about Ashira's freedom anymore. If Varos was successful, this would never end. He looked at Ashera, who had not moved or spoken. Her luminous eyes stared at the holographic projection, seeing the weight of an entire species on her shoulders. Finally, she turned to Kaido. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He has to be stopped. Kaido met her gaze, his decision already made. He gave a slow nod. The final stand. Drake's Hollow was a place where loyalties were bought, sold, and discarded like old tech parts, but for the right price, it could also be a battleground. Kaido stood at the center of a dimly lit control room, staring at the holographic map of Lord Varos's fortress. The warlord's private stronghold was located on Durox 9, an unregulated black market planet deep in neutral space. That was where he would be waiting for them. And Kaido wasn't planning to disappoint. The plan no one would survive. Sarah paced the room, arms crossed. You know this is suicide, right? Kaido rolled his shoulders, checking his pulse rifle. I've been in worse. Sarah shot him a look. No, you haven't. He didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. The plan was simple, but brutal. They would use a stolen smuggler's clearance code to slip through Varos's planetary defenses. They would infiltrate the stronghold under the guise of an arms deal. They would find Varos. They would end him. Kaido had fought warlords before. They all made one fatal mistake, they believed they were untouchable. Varos was no different. But Kaido had something he didn't. Nothing to lose. Durox 9. The Last Stand. The shadow wraith cut through the atmosphere like a phantom, its black hull blending into the smog-covered sky. Kaido adjusted his armor, tightening the straps on his combat vest. He turned to Ashera. She had changed into something practical, a sleek, form-fitting combat suit that still carried the elegant design of her people. But she no longer looked like a captive. She looked like a warrior. Are you ready for this? He asked. She met his gaze, her luminous blue eyes burning with resolve. I was never given a choice, she said. Now I have one. Kaido smirked. Then let's give Varos a bad day. They entered the fortress under false clearance codes, walking straight into the lion's den. The outer guards barely paid them any attention. To them, Kaido was just another mercenary, and Ashera was just another luxury being traded for credits. It was almost too easy. Until they reached the main hall. And Varos was already waiting for them. The final confrontation. The warlord stood at the head of a lavish chamber, dressed in black and gold robes, his cybernetic implants glinting under the dim lighting. His smirk was slow and knowing. I told you, he said smoothly. You cannot hide from me. The doors slammed shut behind them. Guards moved into position, rifles raised. Kaido didn't hesitate. He moved first. The fight erupted in an instant, a chaotic storm of gunfire, plasma flashes, and close-quarters combat. Kaido took down the first two guards with precise shots, while Ashera moved like a dancer, dodging and striking with surgical accuracy. But Varos was untouched. He watched them fight, amused, patient. And then, he moved. Fast. Too fast. One moment, he was standing still, the next, he was on Kaido. His biotics activated in a surge of invisible force, Kaido was lifted and slammed against the far wall. Pain exploded through his ribs. Varos turned to Ashera. She stood her ground. You were always mine, Varos murmured. A flower in my garden. And yet here you are, ruined by this human. His hand lifted, his biotics wrapping around her throat. But this time, she was ready. Ashira's own power ignited. Kaido felt it, a force unlike anything he had ever seen before. A pure, burning energy that rippled through the air. Her body glowed, her hands lifted. And Varos's grip on her shattered. He stumbled back, shock flashing across his face. His voice was a whisper. Impossible. Ashera stepped forward, her luminous eyes burning like stars. You never understood, Varos, she said softly. You cannot own what refuses to be caged. And then, she struck. The end of a tyrant. Kaido watched in stunned silence as Ashera unleashed everything. The shockwave sent Varos flying, his cybernetic implants flickering wildly. He hit the floor hard, struggling to rise. Kaido didn't wait. He fired one last shot. And the warlord went still. It was over. Freedom. The fortress fell apart around them. Without Varos, his forces scattered. His legacy crumbled. Ashera stood in the wreckage, breathing hard, her hands still faintly glowing. She turned to Kaido. He was watching her, breathing just as hard, his rifle still raised. Finally, he smirked. That was one hell of a plan, he muttered. She let out a shaky breath, then laughed. A real laugh. A free laugh. For the first time in her life. And Kaido decided he wanted to hear that sound again. Epilogue, a new path. The shadow wraith drifted through deep space, away from the wreckage of the past. Kaido leaned against the bulkhead, watching as Ashera stood at the viewport, gazing at the endless stars. You could go anywhere now, he said. She turned, her blue eyes soft. I know. A pause. Then. Where will you go? Kaido asked. She took a slow step toward him. Then another. Until she was standing right in front of him. I don't know, she admitted. But I know who I want to go with. Kaido smirked. Well, he murmured. I guess I'm gonna need a new job. Ashera smiled. And as the ship sailed into the unknown, they both knew. Their story was only just beginning. Then let's finish this.